This is the Rate of Rise series brought to you by Keys to the Shop. Today we're talking with Stephen Lee about training up the next generation of roasters. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another installment of the Rate of Rise series from Keys to the Shop. This is where we have elevated conversations on roasting with roasting experts from around the world and helping you learn the science, art, and craft and business of roasting. And you know who else really does that well and is the leader globally in resourcing you? It's Roast Magazine. Roast Magazine is a sponsor of today's episode of Rate of Rise, and they are a fundamental resource. They collect content from subject matter experts, professionals, and leaders around the world to help you become a better roaster and to advance the craft of roasting globally. Go to roastmagazine.com and subscribe today. You definitely need to have this as a staple part of your educational diet of roasting coffee. They have audio articles, which are read out loud articles from past publications. They've published many books on green buying, on roasting, on trade, and I would encourage you to just get in their universe. Go and subscribe to Roast Magazine today over at roastmagazine.com. All right, everybody. Well, today I am really excited to have a conversation with somebody who his career has spanned 25 years, 26 years of coffee and being a leader in quality control and roasting with some of the greats. Today, we are talking with Stephen Lee of Pocket Knife Coffee Consulting. Now, Stephen Lee began his coffee career in 1996 as a barista with Peet's in San Francisco. After spending a number of years in training and education with Peet's, he moved on to help the roasting and QC department at Intelligentsia's Los Angeles Roasting Works. And there he developed his love for the craft of roasting. And since then, he has worked on a number of consultancy projects. He's worked as the director of coffee for Groundwork and the SPC Group in Korea, worked as a green coffee importer for Odyssey Coffee, and has served as a judge for international coffee competitions. And throughout Steve's career, the main focus has been on craftsmanship, education, and fostering relationships across the supply chain to better the industry as a whole. In addition to all this, he has spent 2 terms on the Roasting Guild Executive Council and has been the vice chair of the Educational Committee and vice chair of Events Committee, where he was focused on creating content for the Roasters Guild origin trips. Steve is currently the C.O.O. of Linea Caffe, a micro-roastery that's based in San Francisco, California. And I am really excited to talk to him specifically today about training up the next generation of roasters, mainly about how we can create environments. Well, what goes into environments of learning and education when you're taking on an apprentice roaster and production roasters, and you want to not only hand off the important task of roasting great coffee, but also allow for a fertile environment of education and advancement to allow the next generation to not only learn really well, but also maybe to teach you something and to advance the craft. I mean, this is a very important consideration when you're running a roasting business. Steve has been in this for a while and has seen what produces the best results, both firsthand in his own experiences and as somebody who has helped others foster educational opportunities and as an educator himself. So today, I think you're in for a treat. Steve is a really wonderful person, a pillar in the coffee community, and I am excited to present this to you. So without anything else from me, let's get right to this conversation. Here now is my talk with Steve Lee of Pocket Knife Coffee Consulting and Linea Caffe. All right, Steve, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great to meet you. I can't believe we haven't really met before, honestly, because as we were talking here before recording, realized that we've been around the industry for a bit, and you've been in it since 96, when I was in 11th grade.
Wow. Okay.
Pretty awesome.
Now that is old. I do feel old.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to make you feel old, but you have been around the industry for a while, and I got into it in 1999, and there's so much that I believe you can observe as a steady participant in the industry. So I'm excited to have this conversation. Thank you for being on the show. Well, tell us your life story. I'm kind of kidding. Yeah, 1996, you got into coffee as a barista, as we all do. How did your coffee life take a turn toward roasting specifically?
1996, I started as a barista, and then I was kind of in training and development for a while. And then honestly, it was that old website Coffee that Alistair used to run. And there was a job posting. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and there was a job posting for a roaster QC position for Intelligentsia Coffee. And that was in 2007. And so I sent an email out with my resume, and somehow Casey O'Keefe and Jeff Watts decided to hire me, and the rest is history. There you go.
That's it.
They weren't even open yet. We had to put together the roaster. Still working with Marty Curtis on getting that thing up and running. It took another several months to, get all the permits and the gas lit and everything else, and just kind of like went on our way roasting coffee in Los Angeles for a few years. It was a great learning experience.
That's pretty intense. I mean, it was no small moment in coffee history having Intelligentsia put an outpost in Los Angeles. I remember what a big deal that was. And the roasting operation probably had to get prepared for a lot of fanfare, and the reception must have kind of proved that this is something the area wanted. You said it took a lot to get that roastery up and running, so you learned a lot in that process of being in that team. What was the biggest takeaway as you watched that thing unfold?
Again, I think it's the right place and the right time, and I just feel really fortunate. Again, Jeff Watts and Casey O'Keefe, who was sort of the ops manager of that place at the time, they were amazing. And, I remember Jeff coming up and telling me, like, what I want you to do. And the whole point of IntelliLA was, at least as presented to me at the time, was like, we want you guys to learn how to roast coffee and do it your way. And we're going to be sending coffee back and forth from Chicago and Intelli in Los Angeles. And we're going to cup them side by side. We're going to do everything, and we're going to compare them and see basically what works out best. And we want you guys to figure out what you're doing, write it all down, come up with a hypothesis. And at some point, Jeff was like, I want you to teach me how to roast coffee and tell me what you're doing, because I don't really roast anymore. Like, figure it all out and go from there. And so we literally had the keys to the shop. I mean, we had amazing coffee to work with. We weren't necessarily producing that much, but we had the freedom to sort of hypothesize and think about, like, what if we underbatched this? What if we did this? What if we changed the airflow? Write down all these things and figure it out. And originally it was all on a bunch of sheets of paper, and I have scads and notebooks in office boxes of all of the stuff that I have written down. And then we, at the same time, were also Cropster was proprietary to Intelli at the time, so we basically beta tested Cropster. And so some of those things started to come into place. All of a sudden, there was a data logger and a computer hooked up to the roaster, which didn't really happen before because that was a new thing. And then we're, emailing Cropster, it'd be really cool if we had this thing. And it'd be also really cool if we could set profiles and we can basically track this line. But if we could figure out how to have a set profile and diverge from the profile, we would understand what our experiments were better. So the whole point of the profile curve was to ideally color outside the line and figure out what changed versus to just follow the profile. But, it's kind of fascinating that just to be in the right place at the right time and be able to have, amazing tools just given to you and the opportunity to just play around with coffee and cup and figure it out and then QC it with another large, very good team and get a lot of direct feedback as well.
So you kind of reached the sweet spot at some point through all of the experimentation and emerged much wiser and more experienced as a result of it. When you think back to that time, how much different is that time than today when it comes to learning environments? Because when I'm hearing you talk about this, it feels like the Wild West, maybe literally the Wild West.
Someone had described it that way. Our friend Mark Dundon and Paul Geschos from Mecca and Seven Seeds had come over, and they'd seen us roasting a couple times, and that is almost exactly how they described it, maybe in 2008. So yeah, it kind of was the Wild West, maybe a little.
And today it feels a little bit more regimented, the way that we're approaching things. And Would you say that's because the things that you did back then led to best practices? Or is it more of now it's more constricted and maybe we should be a little bit more open?
Yes and no to both, right? I think that, well, tools, again, having a data logger that's not you is actually an amazing tool, right? It's to have, a probe and then to have data attached to that probe on a computer screen. So you're not just writing down the temperature and then going into Excel with this clunky thing to make a roast curve. Like having that automatically done for you is amazing. And then also having a reference for like, this is what I did the last time. I like it or I don't. How can I change it to make things better is also amazing. So just the tools in and of themselves that are available right now make everything so much better and so much easier. However, the other thing that's available right now is literature. Like there were no books on roasting. It was like Jeff Watts would say, this guy might know how to do this. You should call him. And so I'm like cold calling some guy in Ohio or whatever to go like, yeah, how does this work? I'm working on this thing. And, what would you do here? And then kind of figure it out. So, there was no written resource. There was a lot of the Roasters Guild and the curriculum that was later developed, didn't exist at the time. So it really was sort of a free-for-all. And, there were definitely best practices. We would go to the Roasters Guild and there were definitely, people that did know what they were doing, but it wasn't quite as easily accessible, I think, as it is now. That definitely makes the regiment and things great. And now there's a lot of like theories, right, about roasting and what to do. There's extending the Maillard reaction, and let's talk about the flick, and then let's talk about rate of rise, and let's talk about development time, or DTR, even like percentage of total roast. And those things are all great. But I think at the end of the day, too, like those theories are all theories. And I guess what I appreciated from back then is that you're still going to do a practical element to that theory. Someone says we should do this. We should have a DTR of no less than 21% and no more than 26%. Otherwise, it's going to get whatever, right? So everyone's like, that's it. That's the book. Like, that's the gospel. We're going to do that. And then it's done and dusted. And then it's like, what happens if you do this thing at 18%? Well, we can't do that because you're not supposed to. I'm like, well, but how do you know? Like, maybe that's the best thing since sliced bread. Like, you never know because you haven't tried it. I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't. But like, unless you try it for yourself, you're essentially no longer expressing your own opinion per se. You're expressing your own opinion as it applies to this narrow box, but it's not a totally informed opinion, right? You have to destroy some coffee, unfortunately, and you have to do some messed up stuff in order to learn for yourself. Not everything's going to be perfect, and I think that that's fine. I think when I would hire a lot of people, I generally hired musicians and artists, fine artists, because that's my background. I have a degree in painting and I played music for a long time, but it also means that you're used to failing. Like, you don't pick up an instrument and you're amazing instantly. You used to just like screwing up, making mistakes, working with it. You fall off and then, you find your way back. And sometimes in roasting, like, you're going to have to do that. Like, oh man, like, you forget to make a gas movement or a change and it's kind of lagging and you need to come back because, from a financial responsibility standpoint, you're not dumping those 60 pounds. You're not like, oh, sorry, we're done. I can't do it. You need to save it. You need to QC it. You need to figure out what's viable. You need to be responsible about that. And you need to not be quite as precious as it is. It's not to say that you can't be precious and you can't care, but you also need to know what's important and what's not important. And you should taste everything along that entire spectrum.
That's really difficult to put into practice in your roastery, to say, well, let's have you, a fresh coffee person from 2023, entering into a roastery. Imagine you're them and you're excited about coffee and you want to have some challenging theories or some ideas about what can be done. Now you have to learn the ropes, of course, but creating an environment that allows for some move forward while at the same time QCing between batch protocol, logging the stuff, being responsible. It feels like there's a necessary tension, but at the worst assumption, maybe it's antithetical. I mean, how do you balance that when really you just want to keep your business going and the safest thing is to never question?
One of the things I love is, and not to say that people that don't have sampler roasters are bad humans. I'll just leave that for a whole other topic and discussion. But sample roasting is amazing. And sample roasting programs are amazing. as you probably have gathered at this point with my questioning of written theories, not necessarily the most trusting human on the planet. So I don't trust anybody. I'm not going to trust, like my importer says, this is an 87-point coffee. He's like, yeah, sign me up. $6 later, No, I'd rather cut my own coffee. I like sample roasting programs. And if you can afford it, buy a sample roaster. And within that, then you have a lot of room for experimentation. You have a lot of room for testing out theories. You have a lot of opportunities to figure it out on a small level, because really what you want your roasters to do is, ideally you want your roasters to be great production roasters. You want them to follow protocol and you want them to do their thing. But you also want, ideally, as an educator or as a boss or as a manager, the goal is succession planning, right? You want them to evolve. You want them to be better people. You want them to know what's going on in the roaster. You don't want them to just follow a profile and not know how to get out of it or not know how to improve coffee when they're tasting it, or something's going squirrely, or if your coffee's aging, you don't want them to not know how to deal with that. So sample roasting is great because then it teaches you some basic mechanics and some basic theory, and you can do it 50 grams at a time. Like, that's not like a huge financial outpouring per se, especially with something like if you have like a professional Ikawa or something where you can really plot graphs and really hypothesize and say like this curve versus this curve, and you cup them all out. That's way better than I was doing when I was training people at Intelli, and I'm doing it all on like a 3-barrel 50s got hot sample roaster, messing with airflow and, creating this workbook of like, I want you to do these things and then tell me when you're done. And you basically nailed these roasts, and then we're going to cup them all together and figure out what we liked, what we didn't like, and why it happened and how it happened. And we're going to, again, get out the old Excel spreadsheet and say, things are so much easier now. Like, you can just pull up your Ikawa profiles and like set them all and like what tasted better? What are we noticing? What's the difference? Like how, why, what's going on? Like, it's the potential of information is amazing. And I think it's just the willingness to do that hard work of just like, maybe you're going to stay an hour. Maybe it's your free time. Maybe you don't pay them. Maybe you want to learn how to roast. Maybe it's like, hey, can I borrow this Ikawa for an hour or 2 hours and roast these batches because I want a cup? There are resources out there to do that. There's cupping with as many people as possible, I think, is also a great thing. I mean, I think that's harder now, or maybe it is or isn't. It was definitely harder 2 years ago, right? COVID and public cuppings and dealing with that stuff was a lot more difficult. But I think the ability to get other people's, you get kind of stuck in your own little world, in your own little QC world. You get closed off, and you need to taste other people's coffee. You need other people to taste your coffee. You need that feedback. Ideally, I'd love to see other people's coffee, like other companies' coffees, in other people's roasters, because that means they're trying to stay relevant. They're trying to understand what's good or bad. They're trying to understand the market. That means they're learning. They're still learning, and they're probably uncomfortable again. And being a little bit uncomfortable is good, right? Because if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not learning.
And there is a necessary level of discomfort with older ways of doing things, all what would be considered tertiary responsibilities now, because they're all efficient, like you say, done for you. But maybe the industry is providing now some way of also bringing in new discomforts and new ways to sort of sacrifice, in a way, for the art of it, for the science of it, to invest and put some skin in the game, to not just throw yourself into the stream of efficiency and expect at the end to feel the fulfillment that a hard pursuit would give you. Long hours on the bar that challenge you will develop you as a professional more than really slow bars where it's perfectly clean, never messy, you never spill anything. Maybe that's just because I've been in the business, for the couple of decades as you have. And so, but I think it is relevant to how people learn, because that dark night of the soul, it may be a necessary element to cementing a lesson in you about that batch of coffee, or bringing maybe some urgency to what you're doing, because it is a big deal.
Sense of urgency, definitely, but also a sense of craft. Maybe craft more than artistry, I think. Because, like it or not, roasting's not super exciting, right? It's like watching paint dry. You're just standing in front of a box full of fire, and then you're not. But you do need that muscle memory. You need those 10,000 hours, right? Just like you're saying on a busy bar, same with roasting. You need those 10,000 hours. You need to put in those reps, and you need to sit in front of that roaster and understand that roaster. I mean, I've roasted on a lot of roasting machines, but my favorite is still the one that I've probably roasted the most coffee on. And it's because even today I could probably jump on that roaster and it's like an old friend, right? And you just know how it's going to react, what it's going to do, everything about it, certain batch sizes or certain densities are going to do this certain thing. And it's amazing. It's like driving, a car that drives the way that you drive. Like, how your cars actually settle into your driving style. And roasters kind of do that too. It's like they just kind of like, or at least I think they do that. I don't know. But it's sort of like at some point in time, if you're roasting on the same machine for a long time and you become kind of one with it, like either you're driving like the roaster wants you to drive or the roaster's driving like you drive, but like everything kind of works and you know how to respond and how to react. And it's a beautiful thing. And I think you need those reps. You need to put in the time so that, again, the roaster understands you and vice versa.
Well, that is definitely your pursuit of craft in art and music coming out is what I hear. Instruments that feel good. I as I am here seeing you, there's some guitars in the background. I got a guitar over here, and everyone has their own preference for hand size of the neck and where the fretboard is, and if they can reach certain things. It just feels right. Now, technically, it might be quote unquote the best, but the difference between like a Jackson guitar and a Les Paul is going to be night and day depending on what you want to do with it and just, again, how it feels. And so, yeah, I hear that completely. And you have to spend time to build up the calluses, I guess, to actually just focus on the music and not the placement of your fingers and all of that.
But at the same time, right, speaking of, again, like especially Jacksons and Les Pauls, it's not to say that one roasting system or one roaster is better than another roaster. It's just your friend. It's the one that you're comfortable with, right? So you can roast on a Loring or a Dietrich, and you can get the coffee out of your head. You can get the coffee that's in your mind out of any roasting system, and you can make that flavor happen. It's just about understanding that roasting system, and it's about your comfort level. It's about like, oh, I've roasted on a bunch of Lorings, or I've roasted on a bunch of Dietrichs or Probats or Gottharts or whatever. And it's just about understanding that system, maybe having a few batches on that system, and then understanding how that system works in order to achieve the goals that you have with the coffee. It's a tool, just like a guitar. I mean, like, yeah, you can play a Les Paul and it'll sound like this, but you can play the Jackson, it'll sound like this. And for me, Jacksons are hard to play. So the necks are too thin and they're kind of wonky. And I'll probably stumble a lot. But, if I got time to practice, I could probably pull that off too. It's about practice. And it's about, again, like getting out of your comfort zone and not being stuck in saying like, oh, this is a Dietrich profile or this is a this profile or whatever. Like it's coffee, and you're basically putting heat to coffee and you're making it brown, and you get there somehow, but like at the end of the day, you should still be able to make that brown the brown you want.
That's it. That's the quote. Yeah.
Now you might have to do things that are inefficient to your roaster, right? You might have to like severely underbatch your roaster. You might have to change the airflow. You might have to do things that maybe aren't comfortable or maybe not what the other guy used to do. Well, the other guy used to do this. Like, that's what training in the roastery usually is. Like, well, this guy, the old guy, he used to do this. So, we just do it this way. It's like, well, why are we doing that? Like, questioning those things. But
okay,
in order to get that coffee, from point A to point B, you might have to go like, well, but the machine's just a machine. You can open up the airflow. You can change that. You can change your batch size to change the airflow in your system, right? So you could do those things. It's just, do you want to do those things? Now, then you have to think from a business standpoint, is that efficient? Like if my roaster is at such, and I need to severely underbatch my roaster, so I'm only roasting, 18 pounds of coffee instead of my optimum 60, that's a financial decision. And what should I do here? Those are totally different questions, though.
Right. That's what's acceptable versus what's ideal, and is it still good? That enters into the whole points of coffee and everything else. But back to the idea of having an environment in which you are able to develop yourself as a roaster. One of the things that roasters want to do is be able to spread the information that they have out to a team, at the very least to a person who is the apprentice roaster or the production roaster. And in order for them to be very good, they need to do it a lot. And at the same time, back to the idea that we want some security here because of our responsibility, it feels like we could probably choke the life out of that particular moment where that person needs to make their bones in those put their reps in with the coffee. How do we create those moments where somebody can become intuitively familiar and detail oriented also to what the business needs in the process of learning to roast, so that we can spread the knowledge effectively, but build not just capacity to roast more coffee, but to build more roasters, the people?
That's an interesting question. I think, well, a lot of it, I think, is management style, right? And a lot of it is just how you approach people and how you manage people. And again, I think what your goals are as a manager or as a mentor to people that want to roast coffee. Again, like, what is your goal? So as you move through and you talk about people in roasteries, is their main goal to succession plan? Is their main goal to make their roaster apprentice better than them? My main goal was always to make the people I trained, I wanted them to be a better at whatever it was than I was, because I'm like the old guy. I want my student to surpass me. That's my goal. Maybe that's weird for a lot of people, but that's the deal. So like, it's to encourage them to learn and grow, and then to set up these things and set up learning opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities to learn. So setting them up, either roasting, we're going to roast this tiny batch, or setting them up on the cupping table, encouraging them to explore vocabulary, learning how to cup, teaching them the differences of how to cup, teaching them what matters. Does the flick matter? And then, can you taste it, or can your customer taste it? Because those are also totally different financially viable things. What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? Those are really important. What's the difference between QC and QA and those types of cuppings? And what's the difference between purchase cuppings, or we're cupping and we're evaluating? Those are very different. And to teach people the difference within a time frame, QC, QA it's literally pass fail, right? This is acceptable, it works, get it out. This is great, it works. And let's write some descriptors. Let's talk about this coffee. Let's get to know this coffee intimately. That's different. Those are different things. Those are different times of the day. Those are different opportunities. You're in a small place. Maybe you can only do the latter of like, let's really get to know this coffee intimately. Let's get to think about how this coffee works. Let's get to think about descriptors in terms of marketability. Like, we want to teach you to be a coffee buyer. How are you describing this coffee? What's fair game to describe coffee? What's off the table to describe coffee? How do you take this negative descriptor and maybe paint it in a positive light, which you probably had to do as a barista? It's like, yeah, this coffee's, and then not my favorite, but I can't use my outside voice for that. So let's say something else, right? So, how do you do that? And then get your roaster to feel comfortable about communicating and talking, because cupping coffee and describing stuff is weird. It's abstract. What other people taste something and then start coming up with words to describe it? That's every word except for the word that it is, right? That's bizarre. That's a weird gig.
It's a board game. It sounds like a board game.
Right. So like, you need to acknowledge that it's a learned skill. And so like, I think everything is encouraging. You need to encourage them. This is a learned skill. Doesn't come naturally. No, but like latte art, like what other people like decide to pour liquid from one vessel to another vessel to make a thing, right? You're like, yeah, that's called Saturday, right? I do that every Saturday. I do this thing. It's part of my ritual. Like, no, it's a weird thing. Like, it's a learned skill. You shouldn't be able to do that like off the bat. And if you can, good for you. But like, again, it's sort of a strange thing. So that's why I like people that have done other sort of like hands-on crafts, because they're used to that whole learned skill, not immediate gratification thing. They're not instantly great at something. And I like that sort of like attitude of people that aren't used to being instantly great at things, because it's hard and you need a lot of patience.
Yeah. And perfectionism holds people back. There's a lot of comparison that we can have where the brands that we appreciate and love have it together, and we may be enamored with them. And if we fail, it feels like we're rejected from the crowd. We're not part of the group because we're not able to pour like our hero. We're not able to roast like our hero. And when you give people permission to fail like that, it feels like you're basically affirming to them, I know that you are going to have a certain kind of a default. If you are the person I think you are, if you're a craft person, you probably have some goal setting nature in you. You probably have some standard for yourself. So the other side of that coin must be, the darker side would be like the perfectionism that would crowd out the grace and patience you have to actually honor your own ideals.
Right. Well, I think that's the other thing is like, it's a fine line between this is not your roasting company. So you roast the profiles of the roasting company, until your name is on the shingle, right? You roast the way the company wants you to roast. That's kind of the gig. And that's fine. But I think at the same time, you shouldn't be afraid. My goal is, again, to get people to understand how to be themselves. I don't want you to roast like me. I don't want anyone to roast like me. I want to roast like me, but that's about all the people that should want to do that. I talked to Candace as well about this same thing. And she's the same, like, when we're doing consulting, it's like, there's not enough money for me to teach people how to roast like me. Like, I roast like me. That's my gig. That's my thing. Like, I don't teach anyone how to do that. And Candace said the same thing. I'm like, yeah, it's sort of personal. What the goal is to find and to get people to not pour like your hero. You should pour like you. You should roast like you. So the goal is, again, to get them comfortable and get them to understand and get them to do all of the tools and all of the training and how to get the mechanics together. And then you start dropping in things like, what do you like about the coffee? How would you change the coffee? I'm not saying to do it. I'm just saying, what would you do to make you think you like the coffee better? Get them to be themselves. I think that's really important to me, is to get, and when I'm doing consulting, it's like, I don't want to tell you how to roast coffee. I want to help you to roast your coffee. I want you to figure out what you want so I can help you get there, because I'm a problem solver. That's the thing. So a lot of it's about figuring out what you want and getting you to understand your own self, your own personality, and hopefully that'll make you a better person and more happy.
Yeah. Ultimately, it'll be a better business.
Ultimately, right? If everybody's happy and if your vision is really good and it's your vision, you're the owner of the company, then like the goal is to give you more time for you to be you, right? And really to be able to express that. What I've noticed in the last 6 years of coffee is like coffee's gotten a lot better, I think, overall. I guess the level of mediocrity has risen, right? So I can get pretty good coffee almost anywhere, but can I get truly amazing coffee? I think it's still about the same. It's hard to get truly amazing coffee. And sometimes it's even harder is to get coffee that expresses an opinion. I deeply respect coffee that expresses an opinion. Whether I like it or not, I'll definitely respect it. That someone has an idea about coffee and their coffee always tastes like their coffee. And I think that's sort of a beautiful thing. Andrew Barnett comes to mind. And one of the things, Andrew Barnett's espresso always tastes like Andrew Barnett's espresso. It's a beautiful thing. Like he's got this thing in his mind. It comes out like, even through Echo, Linea, it's like, it is what it is. And I love that. It's an opinion. It's their opinion. Everyone else can do whatever they want. This is why I have a coffee company, to express my opinion. And I would love it if more people decided to express their own opinions and, again, get to know themselves and get to understand what they like, not what everyone says you're supposed to like, right? What you like about the coffee. And so like training and working with people. I also come from an education background, right? So a lot of it is getting people to just become better people and better aware of themselves. Coffee is a vehicle to be able to talk about things about becoming a better person. And if that's just like understanding the way that you like coffee and giving you the tools to be able to roast coffee in the way that makes you happy, then I've done my job. That's great.
It seems that the intentionality that you're describing for coffee, whether it's something that you vibe with or not, is hard fought for in a sea of accidental success. I am not good at playing pool, billiards or anything like that. But I will not let you know that I didn't mean to do that if I do that and it's good. If I make it in, you don't know. I mean, you probably do. I meant to do that. Yeah. Coffee tastes great because we're good roasters, right?
I meant to do that.
So that intentionality, yeah.
I think that's fine. I think, again, like, it's the Bob Ross way of doing coffee, right? It's like there's happy accidents. But to rely on happy accidents without quantifying them and understanding why that accident happened, and then to be able to repeat that's foolish to just hope that accident happens again without trying to figure that out. Or maybe it's not foolish, but it's just like, how often is lightning going to strike, right? And it's not hard to figure out how or why that happened, or just, let's look back. Again, we have so many tools to figure out how or why that coffee tasted good these days, of like tracking. There's like any sort of data logger you want. I think Crofstery even has like a cafe app now, right? Where you can you're just like, dude, you want to know what happened? Like, we can tell you what happened. Like, it's not, well, it kind of is rocket science, but it's not rocket science, right? It's available. It's accessible rocket science, right? So.
Exactly. And then if you have the vision of a team of people in the roastery who are just switched on, curious about the why behind what's happening, and tuned into that and to helping each other, that feels like a recipe for success. And it's all done because it's set up that way by the owner or the person in charge. If the owner says, you're the roaster, you're the head roaster, you're in charge of creating that particular environment. What is the first step that somebody who has that authority can do to make it so? And how long should they expect it to take before they start to see that fruit of that educational environment really impacting their business and the culture?
To me, I guess that's really personal. And again, it also is like people's working styles or educational styles and teaching styles are very different, and people's learning styles are also very different. So it's, what can you do first? I think it's just to set goals and expectations of what that department looks like. Look, these are the coffees we're roasting. This is what we're doing. I think having a buy-in. So if you know a bit more about the coffee, tell them why your profile is this. This is how we're developing this coffee. Like, let them feel like they're part of the team. Don't be like, this is the roast profile, just follow it, and it is what it is. I think it's like, when we purchased this coffee, we really love the quality of like cola and dates and jasmine, and this roast profile really brings that out. When we go to the cupping table, this is what we're going to look for. These are the things we did in the roast profile. See how we kind of changed the trajectory of this angle here. Look at this part, from the turnaround, we're going to back off and we're going to do this. Like, explain that so they really feel like they understand the process. And, I guess the hard part is like, so do you understand the process, right? Like, do you know the process well enough to be able to explain it? I think one of the things is like teaching others is great. It reinforces your own knowledge. It helps you to question what you're doing because you're now having to explain it, and you hear your outside voice saying like, well, we do this. And you're like, wait a second, why do we do this? Like, is this still valid? Is it still work? Maybe I should, like, when this session's over, I'm going to woodshed and I'm going to go over here and make sure that it's still relevant. Is this still the best practice? Or should I come up with a new best practice? I think don't stop learning and always kind of keep pushing for, your ideal. And I think as a department head or as someone that's in charge of roasters or whatever, green buying, having that transparency, and hopefully again from the top down, there's a transparency of like, we bought this coffee because this is what we want to express. And then, if the green buyer is not a roaster, it's like, this is what's in my head. When I was director of coffee at some places beyond the cupping table, and like, this is what's in my head. This is how the finished product should taste, like just from your offer sample. My goal is to manifest that thing in my head and make it happen in the cup. My goal now as someone that's, in charge of roasters is essentially to get them to believe and understand that and figure out what in the roasting process needs to be done so that those things come through in the cup. And, hopefully their head roaster or somebody, hopefully someone in the roasting works knows how to do that. And, or if you don't, you have sort of this is our stock Ethiopia profile. It's like, no, I think I'm looking for a little bit more this or that or the other. I'm looking for a little more jasmine, or I'm looking for a little bit that. How about we, change these parameters, and hopefully you don't have to burn through too much coffee before you figure it out. But 3 shots, that's all you get. Otherwise, it's just getting released. It's too bad,
Yeah. And you can learn how to teach as well. And if you know what you're doing, or you mentioned, questioning, why do we do it this way? There's also the thing where somebody in charge of people will say, well, this person's not getting it. And the question I often will ask is, well, how are you giving it to them? Because very well could be that.
Right. Again, why I also like to hire musicians and artists is because then I can then relate back to music and art as an analogy. What's up with cleaning group screens or whatever? Why do I have to backflush a machine? And you're like, it's sort of like, do you never change your strings on your guitar? Like, it's sort of like resetting. It's sort of like, you're going to play a gig, man. Like, you should probably like do a tune up. You should check your strings, make sure, because I don't know if you've ever broken a string on stage, but it's super not fun if you don't have a backup guitar. So now I'm freaked out and paranoid about that, but that's a whole other story. It's about doing those things, and it's about maintaining, like, a lot of, especially gearhead nerd guitar player people are just like, it's like making sure your amp's running. Would you do whatever? It's the same thing. It's your espresso machines, like making sure it's clean, making sure everything's working, knowing how to do that stuff, knowing how to change it out. That's really important. Same thing with roasting. It's like knowing how to maintain your machine, knowing what cleanliness is, knowing all of the process. And you can relate it to people however they are. That's from an education standpoint. That's about knowing your team. That's about, do you know anything about the people you work with? Because if you know anything, then you should be able to hopefully find something that they can relate to and create a system that, they're not getting it because you're not coming through on the wavelength that they can understand. Like, you need to figure out what they understand or how they're understanding stuff. And you are the one that needs to shift things, not them, because you are the one that's responsible for teaching them. Yes, there's some responsibility for learning, but if they're not learning, then again, you're not managing them correctly. You should be looking at, what can I do to help this person? It's like, it's still the service industry, right? Like, whether it's back of house or front of house, like, you're in the service industry.
Yeah. And it is increasingly true that, the more successful you get, the more your craft is people and not the craft itself so much.
Definitely. I mean, again, from an education standpoint, it's about people. The subject matter can be whatever. It could be coffee, it could be physics, but it's about people and getting through to people and communicating to people.
Well, this has been really fun to talk about because it is increasingly important, as you mentioned, the idea of succession, and hopefully we're being successful with our coffee shops that are serving people well. They want more of our coffee. We have to hire more people to work in the roastery. And if that's the case, then a conversation like this is a good point to start in, to say, how can we do some preventative maintenance on the way that we are educating people and crafting people, I guess, in a way. But I really appreciate your insights here. And they come from obviously a long history of investing into the industry and investing into people. So I really appreciate it. How can we learn more about what you do at Pocket Knife?
PocketKnifeCoffee.com. I kind of pick up gigs here and there, so it's fun.
I like how understated.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. I'm also actually working with Linea as well, kind of full time. So that's sort of like my other main gig.
Oh, okay.
To circle back around, the other thing, something that you said is like, as you have to hire more people, I just wanted to also state there's sort of a personality type, right? Of front of house, back of house. And that's a huge preventative maintenance thing, right? If after a week you've hired somebody to roast coffee or to be in production and they missed having the conversations and they missed talking to people and they missed seeing all the customers and petting the dogs, then that's going to be pretty tough, because again, roasting it's not always the most social thing. It's kind of isolating. It's very repetitive. I love it because it is very repetitive and it's, again, very craft based. And, I used to have this spiel when I was teaching much younger roasters, and it's like, there aren't very many jobs where you get to work on life skills and work on self-improvement, but essentially roasting coffee, you have the opportunity to do this about every 15 minutes, because every time you drop a batch, you have the opportunity to say, this is going to be freaking amazing, or you can just like be on your phone, right? Like, there are definitely decisions to be made. And are you the person that's going to be like, this is a chance to do an amazing job, regardless of what roast it is? It could be like your dark roast and you're not super happy about it, or it could be decaf. Like, it doesn't matter. It still deserves the same attention and respect. People are still buying it. It's still a product. It still deserves your attention. And so you have this opportunity to kind of think about it that way, in a whole other way. This is like self-improvement. I'm doing something amazing every time. Like, every 15 minutes, I drop a batch, I load another batch in, I have this opportunity to reset and do something awesome. It's not going to happen every time. You're definitely going to be distracted. You're going to be, crazy stuff's going to happen. But that opportunity is still there. You screwed up. Oh, well, you know what? You got another chance. Here we go. Like, let's do it again. And you need that sort of mindset. I think that's a positive mindset to be able to kind of work in production, because for a lot of people, it is mind numbing. It's just like, I'm just doing this. I got like, back in the day, it's like, oh man, I got like 20 batches of espresso. This is like 5 hours of my day is roasting the same roast profile of just espresso. You're just like slugging it out. There's no air conditioning. It's hot. It's like 107 outside. You really need to want to do this, right? And how do you make your day go by without wanting to stab yourself in the eye with a wooden pencil, right? Just like, oh, I'm going to focus on this. How do you really be good at your job? And how do you really kind of get in the mindset to really, I love what I do?
That's excellent.
If you can find that person, like, good on you, man. Like, hold on to them forever.
Yeah.
Right? They'll be good at whatever they do, honestly, but they'll definitely be a great roaster.
What a gem. Yeah, that's excellent. What a great word to end on here. Steve, again, wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was really great talking to you as well.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation and that it made you think about how you are crafting opportunities and environments of education and learning and advancement for the people that are working for you. And if you are working alone right now, but succession and scaling is part of what you want to consider, that's all the better, because you have the opportunity to just instill this kind of empathetic, people-focused DNA into the way that you scale your roasting operation, so that not only are you producing consistently great results, so that you are focused on caring for the people that are caring for your coffee as production roasters, as apprentice roasters. This is so critical, and Steve has done a fantastic job today of giving us some pointers and insights from his illustrious career over these many years. And I can't thank you enough, Steve. Thank you for being on the show. If you are interested in reaching out to Steve, best place to do that is pocketknifecoffee.com. And if you are interested in checking out where Steve is currently residing as the COO, then you can go to Linea Caffe in the San Francisco Bay Area, a wonderful place that is owned by the legend himself, Andrew Barnett, who is an amazing person as well. So anyway, check those out, and thank you again, Steve, for all that you do and for visiting us today at Keys to the Shop on Rate or Rise. Now, if you are interested in asking me any questions about this episode, or if you have feedback about Keys to the Shop, go ahead and reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com. And don't forget to subscribe to Roast Magazine, a really fantastic resource that is absolutely critical to your advancement in coffee. And I thank you all for joining me today on this episode. Have a wonderful day. Keep on making great coffee and investing in your people. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.